Blackwood Boys, the village of Blackdown, had stood for over 2 centuries, nestled in the shadow of Hackett Mountain. It was a place of dark canopies, endless groves and burning kilns, where the black soil and ancient trees whispered secrets of the past. 10 families ruled here, each bound by an ancient pact to share the land's resources. For Blackdown's lifeblood was charcoal, and its trade kept the forges of the Duchy of Bannock alive. But those same families, divided by pride and ambition, teetered on the edge of ruin. Among them, the Blackwoods were the oldest, their name etched into the very roots of the forest. Once they had been leaders. Now they were just another family clinging to power. And at the heart of their story were 4 boys, brothers Ego and Damien, and their cousins George and Ewan. Boys too young to be men, but old enough to carry the weight of their family's name. Scene 1, the forest road. It was a cold, moonless night when the boys stumbled upon the caravan. They had spent the day cutting brush for the pits, their hands blistered and their clothes heavy with soot. The forest was quiet as they walked the dirt road back toward Blackdown until the sound of muffled wheels broke the silence. Ego, the eldest at 14, held up a hand to stop the others. "Off the road, now!" The boys scrambled into the underbrush, hearts pounding as the caravan came into view. 4 carts, their wooden wheels wrapped in cloth, rolled silently down the road. The horses' hooves were muffled, and the men leading them were dressed in black, their faces shadowed beneath hoods. Each carried a crossbow, their eyes scanning the darkness. Damien, just 13 and always full of questions, leaned close to his older brother. "Are those ghost horses?" Ego shot him an annoyed look. "No, just men who don't want to be heard. Smugglers, maybe." George, who often spoke in riddles, murmured, "They don't belong here. Their shadows stretch too far." Ewan, always quick to anger, hissed, "Stop being weird, George, just shut up." But before the argument could escalate, one of the men in black stopped. He crouched by the road, inspecting something in the mud, a footprint. Ego's voice was barely a whisper. "Scatter." The boys bolted deeper into the woods, their breaths shallow, their footsteps careful. Behind them, the man stepped off the road, his crossbow raised. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he searched the shadows. But after a long moment, he turned back, and the caravan moved on into the night. It was only when the sound of wheels faded that the boys regrouped, crouching together in the darkness. "What do you think they were carrying?" Damien asked, his voice trembling. "Nothing good," Ego said. "Let's just get back to the pits." Scene 2. The fire. By the time they reached the charcoal pits outside of Blackdown, the village was ablaze. The boys stood frozen, watching as flames consumed the wooden houses. People screamed, running with buckets and blankets, but the fire spread too quickly. The glow of it lit the sky, and the smell of burning wood and flesh filled the air. Damien's voice was barely a whisper. "The Blackwood houses. They're gone." Ego's jaw tightened. "They came for us." Ewan turned on him, his face red with anger. "How do you know that? How do you always think you know everything?" "Because I'm not blind, Ewan," Ego snapped. "Look at where the fire started. Look at what's burning. This isn't random." George, staring into the flames, said softly, "It's the shadow again, the one from the carts." Ewan groaned. "You're impossible." "Enough," Ego barked. "We need to stay out of sight. Whoever did this, they're not done." Scene 3. The warden's interrogation. The next morning, smoke still rose from the ruins of Blackdown. The boys stayed hidden in the woods, watching as wardens and men in black combed through the wreckage. Ewan had gone to the village to find out what had happened, but he hadn't returned. Damien paced nervously. What if they caught him? What if they— "They did," Ego said flatly. "But he'll hold out." Ewan's stubborn. In the headsman's sheds, Ewan was on his hand and knees, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. A warden loomed over him, flanked by 2 of the men in black. "The carts," the warden growled. "How many men? How many wagons? What were they carrying?" Ewan glared at him. "I didn't see anything." The warden grabbed his shirt, lifting him off the ground. "Don't lie to me, boy." An older, drunk warden stepped forward, his voice drawling, low and cold. "Enough, he knows nothing. Let him rot." That night, a village friend freed Ewan and smuggled him back to the woods. He stumbled into the boys' hiding spot, exhausted and bruised. They didn't care about the fires, he rasped. They only wanted to know about the carts, about Hackett Hill. Scene 4, the decision to leave. The boys sat in silence, the weight of Ewan's words pressing down on them. Finally, Ego spoke. "We can't stay here." Damien's eyes widened. "What? No. This is our home. I am not leaving. Not anymore," Ego said. "Blackdown's finished. We leave tonight, and that is final." "Where will we go?" Damien asked, his voice shaking. "West and then south," Ego said. "Away from the wardens, away from the men in black. Toward answers and revenge." George, staring into the distance, said softly, "The road is long, but it will carry us, and a God's light will guide us." Scene 5, the last look. By sunset, the boys had gathered their supplies, stolen food, tools, and the family's prized mastiffs. Ego had one last task, convincing Lizzie, his girlfriend, to come with them. "Come with me," he pleaded, taking her hands. "It's not safe here." "I can't just leave," Lizzie said. "My family—" "They'll come for me," Ego said. "For us. I can't lose you." Lizzie hesitated, then nodded. "Meet me at the last look." Scene 6, the confrontation. Hours later, Ego and George waited at the last look, where the northern road curved to give one final view of Blackdown. But instead of Lizzie, 3 wardens arrived on horseback. "She said she'd meet him here," one of them sneered. "Cried like a baby when we finally squeezed it from her." Ego's face darkened. Without a word, he knocked an arrow to his bow and let it fly. The warden slumped on his horse, clutching his chest and riding on. The other 2 dismounted, drawing their swords. "Into the woods," one shouted, thinking he saw something through the thick young trees. But the boys knew the forest better than anyone and were as comfortable in the pitch-black forest as were on a road at midday. Ego ready for the warden's stumbling charge, he swung second but struck first, his hunting knife flashing in the moonlight. George followed, swinging a borrowed axe with surprising strength for his size. The 2 wardens fell one by one, their blood soaking the ground, turning boys in nightmare creatures of red. Ego beckoned the last warden to join brothers in the forest. "Come and join your brothers." The last warden turned and fled on horseback, clutching his chest, silent in his retreat. Ego and George stood panting in the darkness, their clothes splattered with gore. "We can't stay," George said quietly with a dark smile. "There'll be more than you and I can account for." Ego nodded, his eyes hard. "Then we run." And so the Blackwood boys vanished into the night, leaving behind the only home they'd ever known. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: there was no turning back.